Hey folks, good afternoon. How are we all doing? There's a second video today and I wanted to make over at the Myakka State Forest. We're actually right along the Jennings Trail, which is about 3/4 of a mile long. That's only going one way. But you may be wondering, what types of trees or pines do we really see out here? Well, for those of you who really want to know, we're looking at something called a Longleaf Pine, which is another native pine found in the state of Florida. And generally, Longleaf Pine have a wide range in the southeastern United States. They've been found all the way in Alabama, for instance, and Mississippi, Georgia as well, just to name a couple. But the longleaf pine is actually a rather unique type of pine. Generally, they're very slender, as you can see. And usually, with longleaf pine, you usually have to go towards the upper part of the pine to really start seeing the needle-like leaves. So a common way for you to really know if you're looking at a longleaf pine is to actually look at the needles themselves. So here we go. Typically, longleaf pine, they have their bundle of needles in groups of 3. That's a common way of how you know if you're looking at a longleaf pine, also known as the Pinus Palustris. Generally, these can grow up to 18 inches long. So you figure about 1.5 feet. I mean, just based off of looking at this one, it would definitely be a little over 1 foot. But the longleaf pine generally kind of has like a platy bark, and it has sort of like an orangish brown. And you really won't see more of that orangish color until you get a bit further in the bark. But longleaf pine is, well, it used to be a very abundant pine tree, especially in Florida, for example. So the wood has generally been used to make ships, like wooden ships, and even railroads, like the railroad ties. And, at the time, it seemed like it was inexhaustible because of the abundance of the longleaf pine. However, there eventually came a point as to where it became endangered. And it's still listed as an endangered species. Now, furthermore, on the longleaf pine, it's actually sort of like a host tree for a particular bird called the Red Cockaded Woodpecker. And you could say the Red Cockaded Woodpecker looks a bit similar to that of a downy woodpecker, about a similar size. So it kind of has like a combination of some red, black, and white color along the I can't talk today. Along the feathers. And yeah, oftentimes that is where they nest. And so you figure, with the longleaf pine being listed as an endangered tree, well, that also happened to the Red Cockaded Woodpecker. It also became endangered too, because they highly rely on these trees. And oftentimes too, any burrows that might be around the pine, the wild indigo snakes also like to use them as well. But what's particularly fascinating about the pine is usually when it goes through its first few years of development, it kind of acts more like a grass. But like during that time, when it looks a bit more like a grass than an actual pine, it's actually focusing more on establishing a strong taproot. For those of you who don't know what a taproot is, it's basically the main part that makes up a plant's root. The taproot is really what enables the tree to receive its water and nutrients that it needs. Think of it as something like a central hub. But it's really cool how it does that. It's technically one of the only pines that grows that way. Now, what's particularly fascinating about this particular section of the state forest is I believe this was sort of a project back in the day as to where they were trying to restore the population of the longleaf pine. Because just look, you see like how the trees are in rows and they look rather straight? Well, that's the thing about pines and trees in general. They don't grow this way. This was man's work. Because trees generally grow a bit more isolated, spread out. Definitely not in lines or rows by any means. And so technically, normally, if there weren't this many longleaf pines in one concentrated area, you would normally be finding grassland. Because that's usually the type of habitat that the longleaf pine likes to grow in. Now, with that being said, because of how concentrated it is, the soil down here, or the ground cover, the understory, it looks very sparse, doesn't it? I mean, you're mostly only seeing sable palm, saw palmetto, and even a little bit of wild grapevine. And that's the case because with all these pine needles that are slowly decomposing into the soil, it's making it very acidic in terms of pH. For those of you who really don't know how the pH scale works, well, the scale ranges from basically 0 to 14. Now, generally the lower the pH is, so anywhere ranging from 0 to 7, that is a bit more acidic. And 7 is usually right at that happy medium. It's usually how most pure water is in terms of pH. But then you go above 7, all the way up to 14, and they describe it as alkaline. So because of how acidic the soil is, there's only a few different types of palms and various vines that can survive. But otherwise, it would normally not look like this. Normally, you'd be seeing a bit more of the grassland, as I just mentioned. But it is cool, though. It just reminds you of looking at like a scene from a horror film. But yeah, that's a cool spot, you guys. And really, it's not that long of a trail at all. So alrighty. I hope you learned something of value in this video. And yeah, it was a pleasure to actually do a video, finally, on the longleaf pine. You know, actually finding a good spot at long last. And generally, too, with their pine cones, they're usually some of the largest pine cones that they produce. They could be probably close to a foot. Anywhere around 6 to 12 inches as an approximation. kind of, sort of. So, hope you all get to enjoy your Sunday, and once again, journey on a journey is outwards. Take care, folks. Thanks for watching.